So while we wait for a few more participants to get started, I'm going to start with just a few introductions for today's webinar. I'll then talk a little bit about logistics, and then I'll share my screen and we'll jump into to the presentation. So my name is Jill Kowalczyk. I'm the Canstock Director. I started in this role full-time on May 1st, so it's my first week on the job. But if you've attended our past webinars, you would have seen my face before, and I was working to support the project over the since the proof of concept has started. In addition, we have Hugo Dominguez from McGill. Hugo is part of the Canstock project team, and he's going to be helping me out today with presentation on threat intelligence. We also have Hasten Wong from McGill, who also is part of our project team and has done a little bit more of the technical work, who's on to dive a little bit into some more of the technical details and also be available for any questions. We also have Isaac Straley, the CISO for the Canstock project, who's based out of the University of Toronto and also is the CISO of the University of Toronto. He's on the call as well and can help us answer any questions that we might have. Finally, we have Victoria. She's the project manager for the Canstock project and does a phenomenal job keeping us all on track and pushing us all ahead. And she'll help moderate and support the webinar. And finally, behind the beautiful Canary logo is Christina at Canary, who's has helped us set up the webinar and will help facilitate it or bail us out if we have any problems. So we have a number of attendees that have joined in. I'll just start with a few logistics for the webinar. So we will be giving the webinar as typical webinars on our end. I will share my screen for the presentation. We're going to use Zoom's fabulous technology, and I will attempt to pass over control to Hugo when it's his turn to present. Bear with us if it doesn't work. In terms of question and answers, we are going to take all of the questions from the webinar through the Q&A function. So if you're familiar with Zoom, this will be a repeat, but if you're not, there are two ways in which you can type to us or communicate with us. One is through the Q&A and the second is through the chat. Please try and use the Q&A if you have any questions as opposed to the chat. It just makes it a little bit easier for us to moderate those questions. As we go through, you can send in your questions whenever you want. We'll save the majority of them to answer at the end, and I'll facilitate reading out the questions and then finding the most appropriate person to answer the question. All right, so with that, I will share my screen. And we can get started. So today's webinar is going to focus on the first pilot service that we will launch as part of the Canstock project, the threat intelligence sharing pilot. And we'll talk a lot about the threat feed service that we've stood up. If you've watched any of our past webinars, we have touched on this service already. But we're going to go into a little bit more detail about the service as well as sort of next steps and how you can get involved if you're interested. Having said that, I'm going to start with a really brief introduction. Apologies as this is a repeat for you, but for those who are new, I want to make sure we touch on it. So Canstock started over a year ago as a proof of concept instigated across 6 founding member institutions, as well as with partners across the NREN. And the goal of it was to really look at how could we leverage the power of the collective inside our community to provide better cybersecurity services and support to the post-secondary institutions in Canada. We're looking, we see a lot of value in this approach in terms of leveraging the power of the collective. We work with global partners on how we can collaborate and share as we move forward. There's opportunities around attracting new talent, focus for our sector, and of course, economies of scale. As mentioned, it started as a partnership between 6 founding institutions, University of British Columbia, University of Alberta, Ryerson, University of Toronto, McMaster, and McGill. As well, we worked closely with partners across the National Research and Education Network, specifically BCNet, Cybera, Orion, and Canary. And as we move forward into the next phase of our proof of concept, we're really looking at ways in which we can most effectively deploy services, support the maximum number of institutions in the country. And the National Research and Education Partners are a key part of that. For those of you that, depending upon where you're located, how you interact and work with your provincial or territorial network may vary. But I know for many of you on the call, you get a lot of services and value out of these organizations. And so we're looking at partnering with the NREN to see how we can maximize the value for institutions and support the broadest range of institutions in leveraging the national services that we're looking at. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as it relates to the threat feed service in the presentation. So Canstock, as we noted, was a proof of concept. The proof of concept is over and we're now moving into a transition phase. In this transition phase, we're looking at deploying a number of services as pilots, further refining those services, gathering information from the community as to what works, how we need to refine them, and so that we can maximize the value out of that. In terms of the proof of concept, the last few months of the proof of concept, we have really shifted our focus from testing and evaluating and determine will this really work and how would it work, to really saying, okay, what are the pilot services we want to deploy and what does that look at? So looking at costing, how we can deliver these things, what are the appropriate metrics, how should institutions interact related to the consumption of these services so that we can maximize the value. We're also working on sort of a governance model for the transition period, leveraging the investment and resources and expertise that we have built upon in the proof of concept. So one of the outputs from the proof of concept has been the idea around services and how we might be able to evolve these services. So we've come up with a concept of a 4-phased approach for each and every service that we look at deploying to the community. The first phase is an evaluation service or proof of concept. Don't want to overuse the word proof of concept. But the idea behind there is we get a good idea from any one of the sort of institutions or community that we work with. We test it out, we stand up some technology, we gather feedback, and then determine if it makes sense to move it on to the next phase. The evaluation service phase in and of itself lasts quite a bit of time, in that we start quite small with generally an idea and a little bit of a presentation. We then stand up some technologies and sort of test it out again with our technical advisory committee, and then keep moving it forward until eventually it transitions into a pilot service. That entire evaluation service is what we follow for all of the services we're looking to deploy, but threat feed is the one we're going to focus on today. As we move into the pilot service, what we're looking at in that phase is adding on additional institutions beyond the initial smaller group. And as we add on those additional institutions, we want to gather feedback and input as to how we can better refine that service and sort of increase the quality of that service. And that's really the phase we're moving in right now. Beyond pilot service, after we've sort of further refined the service based on feedback from the pilot, we'll move it into a stabilized service. Very little changes will be made to the service at that point. We'll provide a higher quality of service level agreement as part of that, ensure that there are no major final hiccups before we move it into what we're calling production. The goal is to get every service into production after sort of a 3 to 4 year time frame. And production service is also characterized as being sustainable from a financial standpoint based upon the input from the institutions that are consuming it. We have identified 5 services out of the proof of concept that we're looking to launch as pilots over the next 18-month period. The first is, and the one we're going to talk about today, is threat feed. We're also in the future looking to add in executive news briefs as part of those services. Currently, many of the institutions are taking advantage of continuous monitoring, which is an add-on to Kuchio's benchmarking project. And we're looking at leveraging that information and data into a comprehensive vulnerability management service that institutions can take advantage of in the future. And then finally, detection and response. which is where we're looking at institutions sending us information and data so that we can provide alerts on that. All of these services that we're looking at feed into and leverage each other. And so even though detection and response, for example, is only an evaluation service right now, our 6 founding member institutions are helping to refine and provide information. As part of that, we are receiving actual data, and with that actual data, we are feeding that intelligence back into our other services, in particular threat feed. And Hasan will talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. Through the proof of concept, we also developed a model for how member institutions can participate, with the idea that depending upon the maturity at your institution, you might be able to, you'll need to consume services in a different way, and we need to provide these services such that you can consume them. So the idea being is, although the founding members that are participating in this have quite reasonably robust security programs, the intent isn't to design the services and support and solutions that we provide only for institutions that have that same framework. And so we're looking at ways in which we can provide services for institutions which are consumers, where they can receive intelligence, act on that intelligence in a quick and simple way. Partners have a little bit more of a security profile at their institutions. They can, again, receive intelligence and share information back to us. And then finally, contributors who, the goal there is that they participate fully in Canstock, spend a substantial ongoing amount of time providing intelligence back into the network. And we'll talk a little bit more about how this comes to play as it relates to the threat intelligence, or the threat feed service we're talking about today. We expect that this model isn't set in stone, and it will continue to be refined as we bring on more members and learn more about the best way to provide services to the community. So I'll now switch into a bit of a high-level overview on the threat feed pilot and the objectives for that pilot, and then I'll pass it over to Hugo. So we sort of see 3 phases in the threat feed. Phase 1 will start almost immediately. In June, we're looking to onboard a small number of institutions, probably up to 5. Those institutions that we onboard in phase 1, we're looking for them to consume the threat feed service, provide us with lots of feedback, tell us what's working, tell us what isn't working, and allow us to refine that on a small number of institutions. We are looking initially to provide recipes for deployment for a small number of common devices, and Hugo will talk a little bit more about that. Once we've gathered feedback from onboarding, like I said, a small number, up to 5 institutions, we'll then move to onboard a next set of institutions, likely up to about 20 institutions. These numbers are not set in stone, will vary based on what we learn and how it goes from the pilot. So if things go really smoothly, we might onboard more institutions more quickly. If we hit hiccups along the way, we might need a little bit more time to refine it so that we're making the best use of everyone's time and resources as we deploy these services. So in phase 2, in addition to onboarding additional partners, we'll do more tuning of the feeds and provide recipes for a larger number of institutions that can leverage the threat feed service. And then the goal is in the fall, we'll be able to open it up and onboard a much larger number of institutions. At the end of the presentation, I'll talk a little bit more about, if you're interested in participating in phase 1, 2, or 3, how you can send us that information so we can work on the collaboration. But before I do that, I will pass it over to Hugo. Okay, Hugo.
Yep.
Over to you.
Thank you. So the overall service description that threat intelligence is, threat feed is based on, and that's kind of your value proposition as well, is the objective is to have a consolidated and shared version of threat feeds. So in terms of the source of information, as you're going to see later, the objective is to sign agreement with, in some cases, external feeds, providers such as government agencies or commercial feeds, as well as generated our own content from currently from the founding members. We're gathering intelligence that is generated by our internal SIM and republishing that information into different feeds. So that's one way of consolidating rather than reworking all of these points of integration. The overall goal is to provide the members or the subscribers that I would say that accessibility to integration that is already pre-worked. On the other, in complement, one of the challenge that we found when we were looking at different feeds coming from different sources is that what is the trust that you can have in those feeds, like in really to act upon them. So there needs to be some form of vetting to provide you with a confidence interval in terms of how legitimate or how trustworthy is the IOC really is. So to prevent that, I would say, repetitive efforts across all of the organization, the centralized Canstock is providing a centralized way of vetting that information. Again, there's going to be, as Jill was saying, there will be a growing list of consumable feeds that we're going to use as well, that we're going to integrate. You're going to see our roadmap on that, and a growing number of integration recipes. So from a thread feed that you're receiving, how can you act upon it in terms of your protection solution? So one of the goal is to ensure that there's a community that will be publishing those integration recipes and that it can be reshared across all of the members. We'll go into, I see the question that's going to be answered as well, but the overall, the JSP as any external feeds will integrate into our roadmap as well at some point. A quick reminder of the service architecture, because that's going to drive as well what is the engagement model that might be required, or the level of effort that might be required from a participant. So right now, if we recollect a previous webinar, is that Canstock has their analysis engine, which is the discovery and response, which generates events into a MISP. MISP is the repository of all of the IOCs. That MISP receives and sends information to shared external entities based on agreement that we have with them. And then from that, you have a shared mind mail, which is kind of a transformation engine that creates consumable feeds that you can import into your protection device. There's also a participant. So participants have local events that are going to be generated from their SIM, their alerts, some of the threat hunting emails list that they are registered to. And in some cases, some of our founding members are going to enter that information directly in their shared MISP, or in our context, like at McGill. I'm showing McGill here because right now we're the dev of Canstock. So we're testing things in our own instance. And then generating, replicating these things to shared MISP, and then at some point we're moving that what is deemed production ready to the shared MISP. And I'll explain in which context does a participant should consider or not having a local MISP or local mind mail. But basically, those events are generated into a MISP, and then they're replicated in the shared MISP, where we create shared mind mail that can be consumed by different entities. And that's when we're talking about these this unique content that is industry specific, that is tailored to our sector of activity, is that you have some of these participants that are creating that unique content and then sharing that information that are not accessible to shared entities. So if we look back at how can you be engaged in terms of onboarding into this service? So there are different level of integration, and one of them is a feed consumer. So the feed consumer, basically what their level of involvement will be is that they will need to take these feeds and ingest them into their protection devices. Your protection device may be your firewall, might be your IPS, they could be your SIM, or they could just be whichever system that you want to consume the information in. And that's basically what will be the, I would say, the lowest level of effort that is being required in order to leverage the benefits of the threat intelligence sharing. And those integration, in some cases, one participant may decide to say, well, I have I don't know, Palo Alto firewall, and if no one else did it before, they may want afterward to reshare their recipe so that other members using the same technology are gonna leverage that. And in some cases, you're gonna see Canstock producing some of those integration capabilities, but in some cases, we will be relying on partners to assist us because we don't have access to the technology. In terms of the second level of involvement that you may have, is that you will have participants that have some capability to detect those local events. They are doing some threat intel, or they're doing some alerting within their organization, and they will want to connect into our shared MISP so that they actually can create the IOC. They can create a record that will be vetted by us and then reshared through the shared mind mail and then re-ingested into your protection devices. So that's probably the second level of effort that you can, I would say, the second level of engagement where you can reach, and is that at some point you're going to start wanting to share your own information with us so that we can react upon it, or we can provide it back to you in terms of how to into an integrated feed and reshare it with others. Bear in mind that in the shared MISP, there's always going to be a way that you can define the sharing, the resharing attributes. So there are ways that we can anonymize the data. There are ways where we can restrict sharing the information. So those are all policies that are going to be provided to all of the members in terms of how this information gets replicated where, based on a consistent naming tagging convention. And then the highest level of effort for an advanced contributor is that an organization may decide to put in their local event, their local MISP, their local mind mail, and consume the feeds and act exactly as Canstock as being one that are providing them with information. However, like, this is infrastructure that you have to maintain. This is infrastructure that you need to master. So unless you're planning really to leverage kind of those local MISP for things that you don't see Canstock being able to provide, we would advise, say, well, maybe you want to save yourself the hurdle of doing this. So really is like, you're going to discover what we do to our local MISP and what we do to our local mind mail. But before embarking into, I want to have my local MISP, if you're not going to have any of your local events or any of your automation created there, or if you're not planning on creating your own external agreement to receive data that may not be reshared that, and then you want to recreate these integration points, then it's fine. There are institutions that may want to have that flexibility and that leverage. But down the road, the overall goal is to say, if you're going there, like you're going as that's a heavier level of effort that you're going to need to maintain internally. So again, MindMeld is just a transformation engine for which you're going to see some captures from ASIN afterward, but those are to transform. The MISP is an event base. The local MindMeld allows us to, or the MindMeld allows us to transform the data into a easier consumable format for protection devices. Whoops. Sorry. And then I'll pass control to, can I pass control? I'll give up control, and Jill can give it to Hasten.
Jason, you should have control now.
Thank you. So getting into a little bit of more technical detail, definitely one of the threat intelligence feeds are only as good as their sources of data. So we've been, during the pilot, spending a lot of time on trying to figure out what data would be useful to help aggregate, correlate, and share with the community. We've had a lot of investigation regarding some of the very good intelligence coming from the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, CCCS. We've done some technical implementations, proof of concepts, and now are just finalizing some of the necessary agreements in order to partner with them and be able to redistribute a lot of that information. Also, from a technical perspective, many of you are probably aware of CanCyber and their open feeds to the Canadian industries. We've also integrated with them and had more discussions on partnership opportunities as well. Additionally, we are looking at, as Hugo mentioned, commercial feeds as well. And definitely one of the highly rated commercial feeds is Recorded Future. And based on our conversations, they've been very interested in working with us. And as such, we've actually gone ahead and purchased a license to be able to ingest their feed data and to be able to make it available in our MISP infrastructure. There are definitely limitations on what we can share with institutions. However, this data will be integrated into our block feeds and curated as part of the similar processes. One of the initial proof of concepts that we did during the initial delivery to prove the value of the service was to integrate other open source feeds like Firehole, which is essentially an aggregation of a lot of OSINT. And that definitely showed that it provided value. As part of the maturing of our operational practices, we've further broken that down into what their source feeds were as well, to meet to align with some of the needs of our founding members' requirements. So being able to see the difference between Spamhaus Drop and eDrop and DShield, Bambin XC2s, it allows the analyst to be able to make better decisions and to figure out the good curation processes that we want to implement. And as part of that, we are continuing to look at OSINT sources as well. But one of the other visions that we had wasn't just those external feeds, but also what value we can all provide each other. So one of the things that we did investigate was how founding members' threat intelligence could contribute to the greater security across the educational sector. So a few of the founding members are actively generating threat intelligence already within their localized SIMs. And and as part of that process, they've actually been sharing it with our Canstock pilot. In addition to that, there's many security analysts that have been manually going through security intelligence and adding it. And of course, another topic that I'll go into a bit more detail in later is the phishing intelligence, where I think we're all affected by phishing, and by being able to share that, we can better help each other across the network. What we've also seen as part of this pilot was that, in fact, some of our hypotheses were, in fact, proven true. We've seen cases where some institutions were identifying IOCs that were affecting their ongoing operations. But by taking a look at the aggregated threat intelligence that we were correlating and aggregating within Canstock, we could see that some of the threat intelligence data that was being generated by one partner and correlated with another actually showed that we could actually be proactive because those threat intelligence data were already in our block lists, in our feeds. So definitely a win for Canstock. Additionally, we could see, based on the data being shared by those partner institutions and with some of their events, the detection and response engine was able to detect some of these ongoing attacks, and those could be added and integrated within our central threat intelligence repository. So we definitely know we're not alone in being able to provide threat intelligence, especially in the educational sector. I think many of you are aware of REN-ISAC, and from a technical perspective, we've actually proven or been able to technically integrate the REN-ISAC CES-v4 feeds into the various platforms. However, we've already been in discussion with them about authorization of how we can work together to be able to redistribute and to centralize some of that content and be able to leverage it and provide these block lists that can help the educational sector. So that is something that is on our roadmap and we'll talk a bit about later. And in addition, we are looking at other sources of enrichment and to provide the ability for SOC analysts to be able to make better decisions. So being able to integrate more information about things like SSL proxies or other things from cyber crime tracker, Tor lists, OpenFish, whatever. We are continually looking for more sources of information to help analysts and all of our analysts. So one of the other wins that we've seen as part of Canstock is the ability to integrate the threat intelligence platforms into our ongoing operations. So one of the things that we have done is looked at examples of how we could build templates within the MISP platform as well to be able to track events like phishing. Currently, this is a manual process in this case, but there are definitely integrations that can be done via API in order to populate some of these templates as well. So in this case, what we have is a phishing, a way to use the template to capture the IOCs related to this phishing attack and actually populate it in MISP. And by publishing that within one institution's MISP, it can be published also to the Canstock MISP and integrated directly into the blacklists. And those blacklists or those phishing lists, etc., can be consumed by the various institutions and partners and consumers. So definitely, for those of you who have worked with threat intelligence, no threat intelligence is perfect. And one of those things that we've looked to try to help mitigate the false positives is the concept of safe lists. We've definitely seen it even from commercial threat intelligence feeds where certain items will end up in a feed that may not necessarily, that may block needed services like Office 365, Google, etc. So we've integrated the concept of a safe list within the MISP platform, and those are being leveraged in the processing or the output functionality within MindMeld to remove these deemed safe services from being blacklisted. As such, those are already included and in our general blacklist, which is really designed as a perimeter hygiene service, where you can block, which you can leverage for preventing blocking IPv4, FQDNs, URLs at your perimeter devices. But we've also started to now curate more granular feeds, which are available, and of course expanding, where we have a phishing block list, IPv4, FQDN, URL, as well as a botnet feed. And as we get more complex, this is just an example from the MindMeld output that as we grow, it gets more and more complex. And so from a high level, we do have a plan of releases throughout the year. I've already talked a lot about the current state. I think what we've glazed over a bit about is the current integrations that we've documented and have available, including the IBM QRadar, MISP to MISP, Cisco Firepower, and Palo Alto. Definitely throughout the year, we're looking at working with partners to further deploy more integrations or investigate more integrations like FortiSIM, FortiGate, etc., and to look at other technologies as well. And we're definitely open to adding more into those into our roadmap. At the same time, understanding better how our different institutions that are being onboarded have what their needs are, such that we can also integrate more published feeds. I definitely know that one of the ones that we'd want to focus more on is potentially port scanners, but also getting into the level of having a more granular confidence level things like current threats, and then getting into other IOCs such as file hashes, Bitcoin hashes, etc. I think and I'll pass this back out to Hugo to talk more.
Yep.
I think I might have skipped a slide.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll go back.
Hugo, you just need to go back a slide. Sorry.
Yep. Yeah. Okay, in terms of lessons learned, right now, I would say the status of the service is a community-driven solution. So both features and support. Basically, it's it's the community of 6, but we're seeking to have feedback as well through these webinars. We've been testing as well, like the response of the community, and adapted a lot of our work based on that. Whenever considering moving forward with the Canstock thread feed, I think that one of the things that you need to consider is that you would want to go into monitor mode first, knowing exactly in what you're getting into, and trying to get it through all of the noise that's going to get created. Our warning is that when you're going to go into monitor mode first, again, the first level of IP, we have a very high confidence into it. If you put it in log mode, you're better plan to have some performance and some analysis capability because that will generate a lot of noise. But nonetheless, we do recommend that you go to monitor first. When you're going into block mode, one of the things is that it's not without impact. It has impact, but it also has benefits. In terms of impact, again, we strongly recommend having a local safe list that you see on the last point. That is going to allow you to whitelist something that you might want to go faster than what we have. Basically, one of the example is that one of the other institution at some point blacklisted something that was deemed generating some malicious content, but ended up being another member system. So in some cases, by the time that everyone gets into it and look at, is that a false positive, or is that the truly blacklist system that should be blacklisted, you would want to have maybe your local safe list to bypass the time of analysis. However, the benefits are also very good. Recently, one of our member suffered some attack, and through the exchange of the information, a lot of the other members had a protection of the IP, like it was blocking the IP space of the attacker before they even got started on hitting that infrastructure. So there's the benefit of the integration. We saw both on both sides. And again, familiarize yourself with API, because that will most likely be the way that you're going to get imported feeds. Quickly, in terms of level of engagements, it's a reminder that what you're going to need to put in based on the level of efforts that you want to put in. I'll accelerate as well because we want to have some times for the question. And in terms of next step for security professional, we would say is determine, like the first thing that you would need to define is which system do you want to integrate the thread feed first, and see if those are integrations that are already supported. And for your first year of engagement, our recommendation is start small, maybe as a feed consumer, and then spend time doing your own thread hunting. And once you're comfortable, you can consider changing your level of engagement. If you deploy your own MISP and MindMeld, do so only if you're planning to do something with it internally, and not start with that in the beginning. So on that, I will give back the control to Jill.
Thanks, Hugo. I'll just finish up with a few summary points, and then we'll jump into the questions. There's quite a few questions coming in, so we want to make sure we have enough time to get through all of them. So I think Hugo and Hasten have done a fantastic job sort of describing what the benefits and value proposition is for the threat feed service, really looking to develop something by institutions for institutions. We want sector targeted content that's curated specifically for our sector. And, you know, as Hugo and Hasten have both noted, we've even seen as recent as last week a good test of how this actually does work and will work. So what we're looking forward as we move forward is sort of the way that we move forward. I touched on it a little bit at the start when we talked about the NREN, but we are really eager to develop partnerships with related organizations in the sector to help with onboarding and support and deployment of our services. And so Threat Feed is no exception. As we launch into that first phase of the pilot, we're actually partnering with Orion, the provincial research and networking organization in Ontario, where Orion, through its OnCheck program, will onboard one institution. We will also look to onboard one institution directly to Canstock and see how we can provide a model where we provide more support to institutions across Canada, particularly those that would like more support or have a preference to working through some of their provincial partners, to both maximize the number of institutions that can leverage the service, as well as maximize the skills and expertise in the country. Finally, I just want to talk about sort of the financial model. We're really looking at developing, or we have developed, a cost-effective financial model. There are no specific details in this presentation around the financial model, as we're still working with Canary and other partners to see how we might be able to maximize the deployment and adoption by the community. Specifically, is there a way in which we can find additional funding to support institutions early on as they take advantage of these services and onboard these services until we get to a stage where it is fully sustainable. We are looking at the end game to be on the order of between $1,000 and $10,000 per institution to use the service. It depends upon the size of the institution and as the service evolves, given that we expect, as you heard, more and more intelligence to be distributed through the platform as we evolve. So with that, we will go forward as to sort of with some questions. Following the webinar, we will send out a webinar survey to get your feedback on this webinar and how that went. And then in 2 days, we will be launching on our website a intake form that we will ask any institution that's interested in the Threat Feed service to complete. It's quite straightforward. It will provide us information on your institution. We will take all of that information and then reach out to a small number of institutions for phase one, building up the number of institutions that we onboard into the future. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing so that I can better read the questions that are coming through in the Q&A. Just a quick reminder to everyone from a logistics standpoint, if you do have questions, please type them into the Q&A button you see on Zoom. I'll read out the questions and pass it to the most appropriate person to answer. So the first question is Auth-N and Auth-Z web services defense in depth of data. So I'll pass it over to Isaac, who will answer this one.
Yeah, really, really good and important question. For those of you who don't know Auth-N and Auth-Z, this authentication and authorization, maybe better stated for this presentation as identity services. And I think this question might also be reframed as sort of why did we pick these services to start with? At least that's where I'm going to start to answer the question. And the first piece of it is that we were looking for services that were achievable, that provided quality quality value across the pan-Canadian higher education post-secondary sector. So there are a number of services, especially when we look at the protection of data and cloud and things like that. There is definitely need here, but these services are things that we saw an easy delivery mechanism and the sort of early return on value. I also want to note that there's many other people looking at, and organizations sort of looking at the national model. We've talked about this a little bit before in past webinars. So the NREN and Canary, Universities Canada, there's lots of people who are sort of looking at what are the capabilities we want to see, how do we deliver them, how do we fund them, where does it make most sense to do some of these things. And so when we look at defending web services and moving into sort of the next version of application delivery and data delivery, I think there's going to be more on this front. It's just not in the roadmap right now.
Thanks, Isaac. So the next question, we'll get Hugo to answer the question. Will the data intelligence gathered from the Canary JSP project using Zeek be used and shared as part of the threat intel feed?
Sorry, I missed the question. Which one is it?
Will it said answered live, but I didn't see the answer typed. Will the data intelligence gathered from the Canary Joint Security Project?
So the so in terms of GSP, one of the things that we're looking into that intelligence is actually consuming part of that information into the detection and response data that would then make its way into the threat intelligence. Now we started discussion as well with Canary around our roadmap. So if they were to before the Zeek. Before we could consume the Zeek output into the analysis engine, the detection and response engine, if they were to transform the IOCs into MISP, we could consume a MISP to MISP. So it's definitely on the roadmap. The question is that there was an agreement with Canary and the members in terms of how the data was shared and how the data was to be reused. So there are discussions that we need that we started having and that we're continuing to have, so that part of that information can flow through Canstock. But because there was a pre-existing agreement between Canary and the participant of the JSP project, we need to make sure that all of those agreements are I would say amended, or there is some form of agreement with all of the participants so that we can ingest that data.
And as part of the proof of concept as well, there are founding participants or founding members who are actively directly sending their JSP, their Zeek data to the DNR service to prove that point.
Yeah, and so I do want to maybe follow up. Hugo's point is a really good one. I do want to follow up briefly on the agreement side of things. So we have learned through all of this, and I'm sure many of you know that obviously agreements are important for institutions in leveraging and consuming services, particularly in the space of cybersecurity. We really want to work with Canary and other partners to create a framework such that as we move forward, all of these different pieces and initiatives that are out there to support institutions in the community can be better leveraged amongst each other. So we can leverage data across different services and initiatives, leverage that threat intelligence. It's not in place now, but that is what our ultimate goal is going to be. It'll take us a little while to get there, but we are eager to sort of achieve this as a collaborative as we go forward. So the next question is Canstock limited to educational institutions only? So our focus for our initial launch has been around post-secondary institutions in Canada. So universities, colleges, including CEGEPs is really where our focus is. We have started discussions with a number of partners around the value that Canstock can provide to other organizations in what I'll call the sector, such as research hospitals, research institutes, the Compute Canada Advanced Research Computing sites, and a variety of other research initiatives. And so we're looking at exploring how we can partner with some different organizations and ensure we set up such these can be provided. The goal is to ultimately make all of these services available to those organizations noted in the sector as well. But I'll say in phase 1 and likely phase 2 launch of our pilot service, we're going to focus on universities and colleges in that space. So the next question is, any plan to support PF Sense and Op-N Sense? Hasten, do you want to take this one?
Sure. So from PF Sense and OpenSense, we definitely would be interested in finding ways to integrate with those platforms, provided that we have someone to work with, a good partner to work with, because as we don't run those in production, so while we do have some dev instances, we want to better understand how they would be leveraged in order to find a good integration path. But provided that they can ingest an external feed or a Stix taxi, then yes, by all means, we will plan to support them.
Thanks. So we have a couple more questions in the space. If there are any other questions from our participants, please chat them into the Q&A site and we can answer them. The next question is the initial pricing model published? So no, it is not yet published, primarily because we are still sort of finalizing how we can work with our different partners to make it so that we can effectively onboard as many institutions as possible. We hope to have something published in the next couple of weeks. Any other questions?
We have people with raised hands, so I'm not sure if it's for questions or.
So for those, someone put down their hand. If you raise your hand and do have a question, we are taking questions via the chat. So we're not able to unmute you in our webinar mode. If you want to take a couple of seconds and type it into the chat, then we'd be more than happy to answer. So the next question is, what level of TLP is coming from CCCS? Jason?
Sorry, had to unmute. The CCCS feeds do incorporate various TLPs. We've seen everything varying from white to yellow, or amber, sorry. I haven't spent a lot of time in there, so I can't recall if I've seen a red in there, but definitely they share quite a bit of information there. It's one of the reasons why we do need to have those better understandings of the memorandums of understanding as part of that sharing process that we're working on.
Next question is, how can we make sure that the feeds shared by the contributors are accurate? Is there any validation by the Canstock team done before it's available?
So yes, there are a set of Canstock tags that are being used in order to curate the and to track the confidence levels, the categorization of the various threat intelligence events. Right now, it is a manual process. We are looking at different ways to improve or automate or orchestrate those activities, but definitely we do want to at least make sure that there is confidence in the feeds.
And if I can add to that, this is one of the value propositions of Canstock, which is for the partner and some of the contributor levels, there is going to be an opportunity to do your own analysis. But for those who are interested and just want straight high confidence feeds, the Canstock analysts, again, there's going to be a maturing to that. That's why we have to go through these iterations of moving the service from pilot to production, is to refine those pieces. But we want those those feeds to be high confidence, so you can just say, put this on my protection devices and get on with the rest of my day, at least as it relates to blocking known bad IPs or other information.
Yeah, I would add that when we were presenting in the roadmap, right now what we have an analyst looking at these tags and are defining the confidence level based on the tagging. We're going to make that more consistent, but also more, I would say, equivalent of a CVSS in terms like confidence, like numeric confidence interval, so that at some point as we're going to publish the feeds, but also with the confidence intervals levels, that's going to allow you to define if you want to be more aggressive and then go with like everything that is 50% or above, for example, like still to be designed as how we're going to really publish it. But then you can say, well, give me everything that is 90% and above. So based on the level of risk that you're willing to take on the false positive, you may decide to go with the different level of confidence interval. But yes, that's the basic, I would say that's one of the value proposition that we have, is having people looking at the IOC and quantifying them based on the confidence that we have by cross-referencing information with other known feeds that we may have, by vetting, in some cases vetting the sources, because the sources is reliable over and over again, and also maintaining our own whitelist to prevent going into sending Office 365, for example, into your blacklist, as it may have happened to you if you're using if you've been using Talos for the last few years.
Thanks. The next question, which I think is an important one, are we required to be part of the Orion OnCheck and JSP Canary programs to participate in this program? So the answer is no. Institutions will have a choice as to how they want to consume Canstock services. So initially, as part of our pilot, institutions can sign up. Well, we ask all institutions to actually sign up with us directly in our little form in that sense. But one of the questions on there will be, how would you like to, what is your preference for how you consume services? I've had institutions come to me who are part of the OnCheck program who said, we're really interested in what Canstock has to offer. We prefer to get our cybersecurity services through Orion and through that OnCheck program. And we've heard similar things in a number of other provinces. And so we want to maximize the flexibility and support for institutions across the country. So we're going to be flexible as to what institutions want and what they are telling us they need. We've had other institutions come to us and say, we'd like to consume the services directly with you and collaborate and coordinate directly with you. And so that is again, your choice or flexibility. The Canary Joint Security Project is separate from this initiative. As Hugo mentioned, we've had lots of conversations with Canary about how can we understand what they're doing, leverage their program and solutions. How can Canary leverage our programs and solutions? But right now they are completely independent programs and initiatives. All right, I think that covers all of the questions. I guess I'll wrap up today by just saying we will create a recording of the webinar and post it on our website with the slides for everyone to view. We'll also send out to all of the attendees a email asking you to complete a little survey about the webinar, asking what you would like to learn more about in the future, so we can get an understanding of that. And then in a couple of days on our website, we'll also send it out via email to past participants, as well as on social media, a sign-up form, so you can sign up if you are interested in the threat feed service. If you're interested immediately, or if you're interested in the future, please complete that intake form so we can get an understanding of what the different institutions are out there and how we can support you both through this service as well as potentially through future services. Thanks all. Have a great day.